Chapter 20. Signs and Symbols. Meanwhile, Miss Chalice, whose chase had taken her in the opposite direction from Mugman, was busy tracking turtle-sized footprints that led to the dark end of the Midway. This was not the nice, bright, cheery side of the Carnival, where they sold cotton candy and malted milk mush. This was the creepy, crawly side where they sold critter candy and unmalted milk mush. She got chills just being there. Still, she was determined to find the fugitive turtle, and with a little luck get Elder Kettle's watch back in time for the surprise party. To do that, she'd go almost anywhere. The tracks took her down a twisted, winding pathway, and that's where they stopped, which, by the process of deduction, Miss Chalice had read many detective stories and knew all well about deduction, meant the turtle might be here. There were only two problems with that theory. The turtle was not here, and what was here was nothing Miss Chalice wanted to find. It was a gigantic clown's mouth. Whether it was attached to some gigantic clown, she had no idea, but it wouldn't have surprised her. This was, after all, the dark side. All she really knew was that she was standing beside a row of tiny, tiny boats that took you into the big, gruesome mouth, and from there, well, the possibilities were really too disturbing to think about. She looked around. Up above the painted clown face, there was a crooked, decrepit-looking sign that said, Fun House. This puzzled Miss Chalice. It certainly didn't look like fun, and from the screams coming from inside, it didn't sound like fun. She thought perhaps the sign used to say, Not Fun House, and some of the letters had fallen off, which would have made a lot more sense. But to be honest, the Funhouse sign wasn't really the thing that bothered her. What bothered her were all the other signs, the one that said danger and warning and beware and enter at your own risk and this means you, Miss Chalice, and visit our gift shop. Their prices were frighteningly high. She was about to give up the search altogether when something entering the tunnel caught her eye. It was one of the tiny boats, and sticking out of it like a periscope was a skinny green turtle head. And even though it seemed like the worst idea she had in a very long time, Miss Chalice caught the next boat to Clown Town. As she floated through the enormous mouth, a spine-tingling laugh echoed off the walls. The next thing she knew, she was headed into a pit of total darkness. This place gives me the heebie-jeebies, she said, and not in a good way. She moved slowly down the narrow river, listening to the horrible eeks and shrieks roaring throughout the tunnel. In the shadows she could see spiderwebs, ghostly figures, and ghouls carefully placed to give the ride a haunted feel, but mostly she kept her eye on the boat ahead of her, the one she desperately needed to catch. Just then, she saw a display that looked like a mechanical witch stirring a cauldron with a big wooden spoon. Mind if I borrow this? She said, plucking the giant stirrer from the witch's hands. Thanks. And sure enough, by using the spoon as a paddle, she was able to close the gap between her boat and the turtle's. Well, she must have made the turtle pretty nervous, because the instant she reached the next scary scene, the turtle jumped out of her boat and hid herself amongst the gravestone markers and devilish scarecrows. Miss Chalice sighed and followed her. Little turtle, she yelled into the darkness. Come out, wherever you are. A few feet away, she saw something move. It could have been the turtle, but since it was in the shadows, it was impossible to tell. She took a step forward, then another, and clang! A big pair of shiny cymbals crashed together just inches from her head. It was Mr. Chimes. Of course, Miss Chalice had already met Mr. Chimes once that day. He was the hollow-eyed, wind-up monkey playing a street organ in front of the Carnival gate. She hadn't liked the looks of him then, and she liked them even less now. Eek, 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 Mr. Chimes screeched, then disappeared back into the darkness. Miss Chalice's ears were ringing. In fact, it felt like someone was banging a gong inside her head. You better not do that again, she called out. I mean it. You don't want to monkey around with me. Wherever Mr. Chimes was, Miss Chalice hoped he was listening. The last thing she needed today was to have her head squished by a bad instrument. Just then, the little turtle leapt out from behind a gravestone marked Beware, and ran into a spooky grave of cardboard trees. Miss Chalice went in after her. Carefully, she checked behind each trunk, hoping to find a turtle, and hoping not to find... Clang! Out of the branches came Mr. Chimes. The terrible brass cymbals chomped at her like crocodile jaws. Clang, clang, clang! Miss Chalice moved out of the way just in time, narrowly escaping a head squish. I'm warning you, she said again. I don't want to play right now. But Mr. Chimes was gone. Suddenly, the turtle made a break for it. Miss Chalice raced down the tunnel after the turtle until she came to a haunted holiday scene. It was filled with eerie, terrible-looking toys. There were toy soldiers with twisted faces and creepy, grinning dolls. And in the very center was a gigantic jack-in-the-box playing a mournful tune. Do-do-do-do-dum-dum-dum-do. I can't really sing that one quite well. Oh, whatever. Miss Chalice moved as quietly as a mouse on a stack of pillows. Carefully she approached the giant box. Without warning, Mr. Chimes burst out from behind it. Eek, eek, eek. But when he looked for Miss Chalice, she was gone. The music slowed to a crawl. Doom, doo-doo-doo, spring. The door on the jack-in-the-box burst open. But instead of a terrifying clown, out popped Miss Chalice. Clang! She brought two trash can lids together on each side of Mr. Chimes' head. He wobbled and bobbled like a top looking for a place to fall, then toppled headfirst into one of the passing boats. It carried him down the tunnel. I told you I didn't want to play right now, Miss Chalice called after him, but ask me again later. That was fun. At the corner of her eye, she saw a little green streak dashing out from the end of the tunnel. She sighed. A turtle chaser's work is never done. Got that all jumbled up there for the last sentence. That's a bad way to end the chapter. Sorry about that. Chapter number 21. Horsing around and around. Now, while Mugman and Miss Chalice were off having their adventures, Cuphead had been busy chasing down the third turtle from Hoppus's game, and not very successfully. It was like pursuing a green, leathery cheetah in a rocket-powered shell. Not only was the turtle fast, she was crafty. Whenever Cuphead would manage to gain on her, she'd weave through the crowd, bounding over handbags, swinging on neckties, racing through a maze of legs, and give him the slip. Finally, they came to an open space, and Cuphead saw the turtle running towards a curious-looking contraption. He ran after her. The contraption turned out to be, well, Cuphead wasn't really sure what it was. In some ways, it looked like a carousel, which is to say it did things that carousels do. But if you came to it hoping to find painted ponies and bouncy, cheerful music, you would be very disappointed. It wasn't that kind of carnival, and this was not that kind of ride. Jeepers, Cuphead said to himself. He stared at the mysterious attraction. The decorative outer rim was made out of bones. The poles were made out of bones. Every single horse was made out of bones. Climb aboard, a terrible voice said. You're just in time. Cuphead turned and looked at the ride operator, a skeleton horse wearing a green visor and a red bow tie. He was also made of bones. The name's Fairlap, the operator said. Welcome to the scary go-round. Cuphead gulped. I was just looking for someone, but I think he went somewhere else. Fairlap pulled a handle, and an eerie tune oozed from a speaker. A moment later, the repulsive ride crept slowly around, and there was the turtle, gently bobbing up and down on the back of one of the bony ponies. Both horse and rider turned and gave Cuphead an evil grin. Enjoy the ride, Fairlap said. Cuphead took a nervous step forward. He didn't feel good about this. For one thing, the ride didn't look healthy. In fact, it looked downright malnourished. What if it collapsed? What if it was haunted? What if a giant dog came along and buried the whole thing in the backyard? There was a lot to think about, but unfortunately, he didn't have the time. Elder Kettle's party was in less than an hour, and he'd been through too much today to turn back now. Are these good horses? He asked. Real thoroughdeads, Fairlap said. Surprisingly, that didn't help. Cuphead steadied himself, picked out the least nightmarish mare he could find, and jumped. Luckily, the horse he landed on was not far from the turtle. He reached out for her, but the bone-ratting buckaroo quickly moved to another mount, and the chase was on. Cuphead stood up on the back of his horse. He'd seen this done in cowboy pictures 100 times, and made a magnificent leap onto another saddle. The turtle moved again. Cuphead followed, and so it went, with the two of them jumping around the ride like two kings on an undead checkerboard. Finally, the turtle had had enough. She ducked her head inside her shell and plunged off the ride onto the pavement. The shell bounced, skidded, rolled, and eventually stopped. The turtle immediately popped out and began running away, which meant it was time for Cuphead to make his own leap from the scary go-round, and just when he was about to, vroom! Everything got faster. "Hold on tight," Fairlap wheezed. "It's going to be a bumpy ride." The whole contraption spun like a record player set to high speed. Even the music was faster. The horse Cuphead was riding bucked and writhed, twisting in all directions. Cuphead hugged the pole as tightly as he could as the world outside the ride became nothing but a blur. "Stop!" he yelled. "What's that? You say you want to go faster?" Fairlap wheezed. "Well, anything you say." He reached down and grabbed the lever in front of him. On it were marked the words spin, stir, blend, puree, liquefy, and discombobulate. He pushed the lever to the very end. Suddenly, the killer carousel turned round and round so fast it looked like the inside of a washing machine. It was impossible to tell where one horse started and the other ended, and if that weren't bad enough, and it almost certainly was, a band of skeleton outlaws fell from the roof and landed on the bone horses. They surrounded Cuphead, and one of them threw a rope around him, and just when it looked like this would be the end, Cuphead escaped. How, you asked? Well, it wasn't easy, but as luck would have it, Cuphead was a regular listener and big-time fan of Wyatt Burp, Rootin' Tootin' Root Beer Mug radio program. As you know, Wyatt was constantly getting into jams involving outlaws, and he always managed to get the best of them. Fortunately, Cuphead had heard all 527 episodes, including the 43 that dealt specifically with skeleton outlaws and the 11 involving creepy carousels. Anyways, it goes without saying, with this kind of background, that it was a simple matter of using what he learned to turn the tables on the bad guys. Explaining it would be much too complicated. You'd be better far off listening to the Wyatt Burp broadcasts yourself. And then it will all make perfect sense. But for now, the important thing to know is that Cuphead burst out of the spinning scary go-round, still riding his skeleton horse, and it was a very impressive sight. The two of them knocked over Fairlap as they galloped past him in pursuit of a turtle, and they had never looked back. Now, as it happened, this particular skeleton horse was every bit as fast as he was disgusting. So they were able to gain a lot of ground in particularly no time at all. They weaved through the crowd, with Cuphead gripping the reins and guiding the horse this way and that way. Then, when Cuphead looked to his right, he saw the turtle running down a side path, and when he looked to his left, he saw another turtle running down another side path. It was all very confusing, until he noticed that Miss Chalice and Mugman were trailing along behind them. "Whoa!" Cuphead yelled, pulling back on the reins. The horse locked down his hooves, and they slid to a stop. "Look over there," Miss Chalice said. They all did. It was the third turtle, the one Cuphead had been chasing. She was standing in the center of the midway, holding out Elder Kettle's watch. Cuphead made a mental note never to trust a turtle. They were nothing but shells and sticky fingers. But the worst part was, she wasn't alone. Chapter 22, Cuphead's Curse. Standing alongside the turtle was a regular who's who of hoodlumism. Everyone was there. Peppy the Clown, Brinnybeard, Hopus Pocus, Jimmy the Great, Sally Stageplay, Calla Maria, Mr. Chimes, and the cigar-chomping, derby-wearing duck who had stolen the watch in the first place. Peppy reached down and took the treasure from the turtle. "So, we meet again," Peppy said to the trio. He handed the watch to the duck. "Take this. You know what to do." The duck nodded. Then he looked at Cuphead. "Don't feel bad, kid. It's only a year until your friend's next birthday," he said. "And you know what they say, time flies." It was an excruciating pun. The odd ducks would have loved it. But it was also true. Time really did fly, and the blabbering bird intended to prove it. He tucked the magnificent timepiece under his derby and carried it through the air. Then, in the ultimate insult, he left it in the one place where Cuphead could never, ever get to it. He hung it from the very highest point on the dizzy boarding. Cuphead gasped. "Well, what are you waiting for?" said Peppy. "Go get it!" "Unless you're scared." Scared? Cuphead didn't know the meaning of the word. Then he took a long look at the dizzy board and realized he was willing to learn. The Dizzy Borden was a sleek, sinister roller coaster that zoomed around a looping, twisting, stomach-turning track. It reached heights that would give a mountain goat a nosebleed. It was dangerous. It was evil. It was rage on a rail. And speaking of rage, who you callin' scared? Miss Chalice seethed. We ain't scared of nothing. The nerve of some people. Miss Chalice wasn't about to let some smart-aleck clown tell her what she could or couldn't do, so much without as a by your leave, and grabbed Cuphead and Mugman by their collars and pulled them towards the roller coaster. Cuphead couldn't believe this was happening. His master plan was falling apart. From the very beginning, Elder Kettle's birthday had been his excuse for not going on the roller coaster, and now his birthday present was the thing forcing him onto the beast. It couldn't be. Fate would not be that cruel. We'll show them who's scared, Miss Chalice muttered. And that know-it-all frog better stay out of our way, too. Frog? Oh, of course, the frog. Cuphead's eyes lit up. In order to ride the roller coaster, they'd have to get past Are You Big Enough? The measuring frog. There was still a chance. Are You Big Enough was a large sign that looked like a frog wearing polka dot vest and a blue tailcoat. There was one posted outside every ride at the carnival. If you were taller than RU's outstretched hand, that meant you could go on the ride. But if you were shorter, you'd have to wait until you were big enough. Cuphead thought the shortest, squattiest thoughts he could think. Holy mackerel, Mugman said, and he gave a long whistle. They arrived at the Dizzy Borden. The massive track towered above them, blocking out the sun and specifically dimming their hopes of a pain-free future. Cuphead pulled away from Miss Chalice and waltzed up to the Are You Big Enough? Glorious protector of the short and stumpy. He held his breath and moved in close to the sign, and though it was by only the smallest part of an inch, he fit just underneath RU's hand. You are not big enough, the sign said. Cuphead couldn't contain himself. Yay, he said, leaping into the air. Unfortunately, he made his leap while he was still standing under the sign. His head bonked against RU's hand, causing a tiny little lump to sprout. And while it wasn't a very big lump, you are big enough. Congratulations. It added just about enough height to put him on the ride. Defeat had been snatched from the jaws of victory, and there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. Come on, boys, Miss Chalice said. We've got to go pick up our watch. Pick up their watch? Had she just said pick up their watch? Like it was something in Pork Ryan's store instead of the most terrible, treacherous place in the world? Because if that's what she said, then Cuphead had news for her. She was right. They did have to go back to pick up their watch. He didn't know if it was Miss Chalice's words or the fact that they had recently received a blow to the head from the wise and helpful Are You Big Enough, who was about so much more than measuring. But he suddenly realized he'd been looking at this all wrong. It wasn't about the roller coaster, it was about the watch. It had always been about the watch, because as bad as this ride might be, and he was expecting something between a disaster and a tragedy, showing up at Elder Kettle's party without a birthday gift would be even worse. Besides, he couldn't let his friends go up there alone. They needed him, and they'd never let him live it down. So with their mission settled and their fate sealed, the three of them locked arms and marched out to meet the infamous Dizzy Borden. It would be a meeting none of them would ever forget. When they reached the loading platform, Dizzy was there waiting for them. Oh, good. 3 new riders, the train said. Now watch your step. I wouldn't want anything bad to happen to you. Then it let out a laugh so chilling that Cuphead thought they might have to wait for the spring to thaw. Of all the villains they'd met in this place, and nothing compared to the Dizzy Borden. They climbed into their seats. As soon as he sat down, Cuphead saw a seatbelt with a silver buckle. He reached for it. It moved. He reached again. It moved again. And this time, it retreated inside the seat and refused to come back out. The Dizzy Borden gave a low, guttural growl. Everybody comfy? It asked. My safety belt just ran away from me, said Cuphead. Yes, it's shy around new people, said the train. Ready? No! Cuphead insisted. Good! Yelled the train, and it took off with a burst of speed that nearly threw Cuphead out of the cart. He held on for dear life as they roared around the track. The train leapt through a fire ring and spiraled through a corkscrew and flipped upside down as they crossed a pit of hungry-looking alligators. Woohoo-wee! Miss Chalice screamed. Isn't this fun, Cuphead? Cuphead screamed as well, but in a slightly different tone. You see, he was dangling from the cart like a worm on a hook as the alligator snapped at him from below. Help! He yelled, and Mugman pulled him back inside. Just in time, too, because up ahead was a part of the ride they'd been waiting for. A skyscraping loop-de-loop that would take them so close to the stars they'd be able to ask for autographs. That's where they'd find Elder Kettle's watch. The loop was a fiendishly impressive feat of irresponsible engineering. The kind of thing you'd build only if your goal was to make sure hospitals did a brisk business. As Cuphead understood it, the train would rocket around the loop 3 times in a row, meaning they'd have 3 chances to grab the watch. If they failed to reach it by the 3rd try, well, they would have gone through all of this for nothing. The dizzy Borden picked up speed. First it made a terrifying plunge, then shot up one side of the loop. Cuphead felt his eyes being pushed into the back of his head, but before that happened, he spotted the watch. It was hanging there, all gold and shimmering, just where the duck had left it. He grabbed for it as they barreled past, but was a fraction of a second too late. Miss Chalice and Mugman missed as well, and they braced themselves for the second pass. This time, Cuphead was sure they'd get it. He got in position and leaned out exactly at the right angle, but just as he made his reach, the treacherous train whipped violently to the side, flinging him back into the cart. On the bright side, this meant Miss Chalice could use his face as a stepping stool. A maneuver that gave her the extra length she needed to reach the chain. And she might have had it, too, if Mugman hadn't grabbed for it precisely at the same moment, and then the 2 of them collided. Ha 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 ha! The train laughed as the 3 of them lay in a helpless, tangled heap. Last chance, don't blow it. And even though he knew the train was trying to be rude, Cuphead couldn't have agreed more. Last chance, he said. Let's not blow it. They nodded and got ready for their 3rd go-round on the loop-de-loop. This was it, the final pass. The train sneered and streaked down the track like a meteor. As they blazed towards the watch, Miss Chalice moved to the edge of the cart, or tried to. Suddenly her seatbelt cinched up like a vice, squeezing her so tightly she could barely breathe. She tried to free herself, but it was of no use. She'd been taken out of commission. Fortunately, Cuphead and Mugman had a plan. Mugman would hold Cuphead's ankles while he leaned all the way out of the roller coaster and then grabbed the watch. It was risky, but it had a good chance of working. Of course, the dizzy Borden could never allow their plan to work out so easily. With Mugman holding, Cuphead reaching, the brothers began their acrobatic attempt. That's when the front of the train leapt into the air, causing the carts behind it to snap like a whip. Mugman lost his grip, and Cuphead found himself suspended in midair. He reached out just in time to grab hold of the very last cart. The coaster whipped back and forth, trying to throw him, but Cuphead held on tight. Then, when the cart jerked to the right, Cuphead swung his legs to the left, and with only the tip of his toe, mind you, snagged the chain of the watch. He quickly kicked it into his waiting hand and crawled back into the cart. You got it, Miss Chalice cheered. Got it, the train said. Well, I'll fix that. Furious, the dizzy Borden headed for the most perilous part of the track, the chopper. The chopper was a gigantic axe that swung just over the heads of the cart riders. At least it was supposed to be over their heads. This time things would be different. As they headed towards the enormous axe, the friends felt their seats being lifted in the air. The gigantic axe was swinging towards them like a perilous pendulum. Everybody out, Miss Chalice said, and with one great plunge they leapt out of the cart and onto the chopper. This was, at best, a temporary solution. When the axe swung outward, the 3 of them were flung into the air and over the midway. They flew past Beppy and Brinnybeard, Hoppus, Sally, Jimmy, Calla Maria, and Mr. Chimes, and the derby-wearing duck, and kept right on going. After them, Beppy said. Cuphead was the first to come down. He crashed through the top of a tent, landing on a knife-thrower in the middle of his act. Tragically, this caused one of his throws to go badly off course, and the knife sailed across the tent and shaved off half of Barnaby, the human cannonball, Mulden's handlebar mustache. And since perfect balance is essential when you're being shot from a cannon, Barnaby's now lopsided nose cozy caused him to miss the net entirely and land in Ernest Elephant's food trough. Oops, sorry, Cuphead yelled, but the human cannonball was not in a forgiving mood. Neither was Ernestine. I think that's how you pronounce that name. The 2 chased him around the tent. Meanwhile, one tent over, Miss Chalice had her own troubles. She'd come down during a performance by the Yakrobats, who were just completing their world-famous 15-yak pyramid, or the yak stack as they called it in the papers. Well, as you could imagine, it raised some eyebrows when a non-yak outsider landed at the top of the pyramid. Still, it was a nice landing, and the audience cheered appreciatively. And everything might have been all right had the moment not brought out Miss Chalice's natural showmanship. "Ta-da!" she cried, and took a deep bow. It was the bow that did it. The tower of yaks shook, then shifted, then toppled into a pile. "We'll get you for this," the bottom yak groaned. And once they recovered, they chased her around the room. As for Mugman, he didn't have the luxury of landing on a nice soft tent. He came down on the Test Your Strength booth, where he landed on the lever, sent the puck shooting upwards, and rung the bell. "Congratulations, you win a tin monkey," the booth operator said. "Oh, this is the best day ever," said Mugman, and strolled out of the booth with his prize. The three of them met up again on the main aisle of the Midway. Cuphead was being chased by a half-handlebar mustache Muldoon and a hungry-looking elephant. Miss Chalice was running away from 15 angry yaks, and Mugman was admiring his monkey. But the worst was still yet to come. "There they are!" Beppy yelled, and the mob of villains rushed towards them. "This way!" Cuphead yelled. The three ran down the aisle until they came to a split in the path. In the confusion, Cuphead and Miss Chalice turned left, and Mugman turned right. The villains split up and went after them. Cuphead and Miss Chalice looked around for a place to hide. Then Miss Chalice spotted something even better. "Follow me," she said. The two of them climbed over a railing and jumped into the seat of a bumper car. "Do you know how to drive one of these things?" Cuphead asked. Miss Chalice smiled. "Just watch me," she said. Remember, Miss Chalice's dream was to be a race car driver. She steered her way through the crowd of bumper cars, narrowly missing each one with her expert driving. And then, thud! Something rammed them from the rear. When Cuphead turned around, he saw Jimmy the Great and Mr. Chimes in the car directly behind them. Before he could warn Miss Chalice, thud! A car with Brinny Beard and Hoppus bashed them from the side. "Hold on," said Miss Chalice, and turned towards the rail. Crack! The bumper car busted through the wooden rail and went racing down the aisle. "We've got to get Mugman," Cuphead said. "We'll find him later," said Miss Chalice. "Right now, we've got to get our way out of here." And a few seconds later, the little bumper car headed out the front gate and onto the open road. And that is the end of chapter 22. Yeah, I'm almost at the end of the book. I think it's 23, 24, 25. That'll be on the next video I do. And then, yeah, that'll be it for the book. Yeah, just thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. And have a good day, guys. Cheers.